Daenerys Targaryen stood at the threshold of a world forever changed by flame and ash. The dawn was cold, yet the breath of night still lingered as shadows stretched across the scorched earth. Though the embers of Khal Drogo's pyre had died, she felt their heat in her veins. It was a warmth she knew she must carry into the unknown. Her sun and stars lay entombed in that ragged pile of cinders, yet from those very embers she had emerged alive, wreathed by the cries of newly hatched dragons clinging to her skin. They were small, no larger than cats, but she felt their potential simmering within their fragile frames. Their presence reminded her that a destiny awaited her beyond the red wasteland of the Dothraki Sea. Still, she was shaken to her core, widowed, exiled, and bearing a name infamous across a realm she barely recalled. The remains of the Khalasar huddled in the dim gloom, only a few hundred from the thousands who had once followed Drogo. Hunger and fear gnawed them. Their call was gone. In the eyes of the Dothraki, a Khaleesi had no meaning without her husband, no power, no place. Some among the scattered horsemen whispered dark rumors of omens and witchcraft. Others watched the three serpent-like beasts clinging to Daenerys' shoulders and arms with open awe and terror. The air reeked of sweat, burnt hair, and dread. And yet, Daenerys Targaryen stood tall in the darkness, her silver-gold hair in tangles around her face, her violet eyes fierce. Jorah Mormont, exiled knight of Westeros, stepped forward with careful steps. Dust coated his once fine clothing. He moved as though a single misstep might rouse the entire encampment to fury. Cradling his sword's pommel in one hand, he cast his gaze over the unspeaking Dothraki to the scorched patch of ground where Drogo's pyre had stood, and then back to Daenerys. Even in silence, a question smoldered in his eyes: how now would she lead? A hush had settled like the hush before thunder. Dany could see the doubt turning behind the sun-dried faces of these riders who had followed Drogo's Khalasar to the ends of the grasslands. She felt a cold edge of panic push against her resolve, but she could not allow the fear to master her. She had walked into the fire. She had become something new. She would seize the truth and bind the Dothraki to her cause. She took a step forward. Her feet were calloused and raw, but she kept her head high. The black dragon on her left shoulder stretched its slender neck and squeaked in indignant protest at her movement. The green one on her right snorted wisps of smoke that dissipated in the air. The white and gold hatchling at her chest coiled its tail around her arm. Even in miniature, they radiated an untamed majesty. The riders stared. Some, who had once been fierce warriors, reflexively lowered their eyes as though confronted by living gods. Others recoiled. When Daenerys spoke, her voice trembled at first, but she forced it to ring out across the silent throng. "Blood of my blood," she said in the Dothraki tongue, mustering every ounce of grit. "You followed Khal Drogo across the seas of grass. You fought in his name. And now he is gone. His spirit gallops the night lands, free from pain. But his blood lives in me. I am Daenerys Stormborn, of the blood of old Valyria. I am the last dragon." She gently brought a hand to the black-scaled creature perched on her shoulder. The watchers murmured in awe. "Though we have lost our call, we are still Khalasar. We will not wander leaderless. I do not promise an easy path, but I promise you glory." A few men shifted, spines rigid. She knew that even now whispers might gather, but Jorah stepped beside her. Though he was not Dothraki, he bore the scars of a warrior, and his unwavering stare challenged any who would doubt her. She continued, "A call leads by strength. I promise you I have the strength to guide you to a new land, to my homeland, where your riders will cross fields you have never known, see mountains that stretch beyond your vision, and conquer in the name of the true dragon. Come with me, fight for me, and I will see you all rewarded." Her hair, once braided and shining, was singed short in places where the flames had consumed it. One might have thought her a pitiful sight, but in that moment she seemed carved from bronze, an unbreakable statue defying both the gods and the horrors that had befallen her. The dragons added an otherworldly accent to her presence. One of Drogo's former blood riders pressed forward. Hago was his name, stern-eyed, hulking, with a wiry mustache. He spat at the ground and surveyed the scrawny forms of the dragons before tilting his gaze to Daenerys. "A woman cannot lead a Khalasar. The stallion has fallen. You are not Drogo. You are not a call. And those things," he pointed a thick finger at the hatchlings, "are a trick. Dead lizards awakened by dark sorcery." The tension in the air coiled like a viper. Jorah's hand went to the hilt of his sword, but Daenerys raised her chin. "When the night was darkest, I walked into the flames to give Khal Drogo peace. I did it not to prove my strength, but to honor my sun and stars. Yet the fires gave me life. They gave life to these children." She gently stroked the black dragon's neck. "If you think me weak or that these creatures are a mere trick, then strike me down now." Hago's nostrils flared. A sly grin, half contempt, half challenge, touched his lips. Then, with a savage roar, he lurched forward, a curved arak whistling in his hand. Daenerys did not flinch. Before the man could bring his blade within a foot of her, Yora's steel rang free. He met Hago's strike with a hiss of metal on metal. The two men strained, faces contorted in fury. The Khalasar drew back, forming a tight circle of onlookers. Hago was strong, his muscles honed from years on horseback. His arak caught the early sunlight, slashing a sharp arc that tested Yora's defenses. But the knight stepped into the blow rather than away, letting their blades spark with savage intensity. "You will not touch her," Yora growled. The arak slid along Yora's sword in a shower of sparks as Hago twisted his wrists, attempting to overwhelm the foreigner. The men were chest to chest, pushing against each other, locked in lethal contest. But Hago had not expected the knight's relentless technique. Yora let Hago push his blade out wide, then hammered a plated elbow into the Dothraki's jaw. Hago staggered, spitting blood. Yora's sword whirled, lightning swift. Hago tried to parry, but the battered edge of Yora's steel cut into his wrist, forcing him to drop the arak. Stunned, Hago stumbled. A heartbeat later, Yora's sword point hovered at the hollow of Hago's throat. Blood dribbled down Hago's arm. The circle of watchers was deathly silent, many bearing witness with wide eyes. The black dragon on Daenerys' shoulder unfurled its wings and emitted a raspy shriek as if lending its voice to the tension. "You would have died in the desert, left to the crows, if not for the Khaleesi," Yora said. "Defy her again, and I will cut out your heart for the carrion eaters myself." Tom seemed to hold its breath. Daenerys looked at Hago, remembering how fiercely loyal he had once been to her husband. It pained her to see how quickly he had turned on her. But if she let him live in open defiance, the rest might sense weakness. The old Daenerys might have yielded to mercy. Now she knew she had to be steeled as dragon fire. "End it," Daenerys said softly, her voice unwavering. Hago's dark eyes showed a flicker of shock. But Daenerys did not let her resolve falter. Drogo would have spilled the man's blood in a blink. And this was how the Dothraki lived, a contest of strength resolved without hesitation. Yora's blade flicked across Hago's throat in a fluid, deadly gesture. Blood spattered the ground and the man crumpled. A hush fell over the Khalasar. The other two blood riders, Kotho and Kahalo, exchanged wary glances. They were armed, yet neither stepped forward. They could see how swiftly Yora had dispatched Hago, and they could see the dragons watchful upon Daenerys' body. She turned to the gathered riders. "These are my children, hatched under a bleeding star. And I promise you they are as real as my claim to the leadership of this Khalasar. If any man or woman here doubts me, step forward now." She let her voice become a whip. "But no, I do not take defiance lightly. In me, the blood of the dragon runs hot. If you would follow me, if you would ride behind the Khaleesi who was forged in the funeral pyre of Drogo, then kneel." One by one, men and women sank to their knees. Some pressed their foreheads to the ground, others bowed low enough to show their napes in a display of submission. The last to kneel were the blood riders, Kotho and Kahalo, though the tension in their jaws betrayed lingering doubts. Even so, they lowered themselves. With that, Daenerys let out the breath she had been holding. She had not known if they would accept her, or if every single one would turn away or attack. She did not smile. The fire in her chest was tempered by grief and by the knowledge that she must shepherd these people across storms she could barely imagine. They were her people now. She raised an arm, calling Yora to her side. "We sail for Westeros," she said, letting the Dothraki words climb the hush like the chanting of a new gospel. "And I will show you all that the blood of the dragon is not yet spent." A murmur rippled through the riders. Few among them even knew the shape of a ship, let alone a great salt sea. But the vow had been made. Yora nodded, though concern flickered in his eyes. As the orange rays of morning stretched across the horizon, Daenerys ordered the Khalasar to prepare. They would ride east, not west, an irony for any who knew their ultimate destination. But she had gleaned from Yora and others that she would need ships large enough to carry men, horses, and supplies across the narrow sea. Such vessels would not be found in V's Dothrak nor upon the grassy plains. They needed to go to a port city. The word on every slaver's lip in that portion of Essos was Karth, the greatest city that snaked along the Jade Gates. It was said Karth's merchant princes possessed wealth unimaginable. Ships abounded there. Perhaps an alliance or cunning persuasion might grant Daenerys what she needed. They broke camp quickly. The pyre's ashes mingled with the footprints of thousands of hooves that had once stamped in savage adoration of Khal Drogo. His time had ended. Now was hers to seize or squander. The morning dust rose around the newly formed Khalasar. While they did not number in the thousands they once had, hundreds of riders still remained. Most led 2 or 3 spare mounts. The captured women, the children, the elderly, all trudged behind, bound to this new future by necessity and fear. Daenerys insisted that they be freed from any shackles they still wore. She spoke to them gently, explaining that she would be a different sort of leader than Drogo. Some of the older women looked upon her with wonder, as though seeing a living legend. And so the column set forth, winding across the emptiness under the blazing sun. At its head rode Daenerys on a blood-red mare that had once been Drogo's, the reins calloused in her hands. Her dragons, for now, rode in small wicker baskets strapped to the flanks of her own mount, as they could not yet fly far on their own. Their squeaks and mewling croaks provided a ceaseless soundtrack, odd and unnerving, a reminder that something ancient and dangerous now accompanied the Khalasar's progress. Ser Jorah flanked her, scanning the horizon for any threat. In his voice, when he spoke, Daenerys heard equal measures of caution and devotion. "Khaleesi," he said softly, "you have done what few could. United this Khalasar around you, but the road ahead is perilous. The Red Waste nearly destroyed us once, and Karth is no safe haven. The city's merchants are cunning. They will not part with ships for nothing." She nodded, eyes steady on the shimmering line of heat. "I will give them what they desire. Gold or trade or an alliance with the Mother of Dragons. They will want my dragons, perhaps, but they cannot have them," she added firmly. "These three are my children and the key to my birthright. With them I will take the Iron Throne." Jorah paused, measuring his words. "Khaleesi, if I may ask, is it truly wise to attempt an invasion of Westeros so swiftly? The land is racked by war, true, but that war has many faces. The Lannisters hold King's Landing. Stark banners fly in the north. Renly Baratheon and Stannis Baratheon both vie for the crown. And Balon Greyjoy is stirring on the Iron Islands. There is chaos indeed, but chaos does not always yield to a small army." Daenerys' expression did not shift. "A Targaryen cannot wait for the tides of fortune to sweep her back to her throne. Ser Jorah, my birthright was stolen by the usurper. My brother Viserys died chasing half-promises. I will not be undone by timidity. The Seven Kingdoms war among themselves, you say. That is exactly why I must strike now. I have the blood of the dragon, and a Khalasar behind me, not to mention dragons themselves. Even if they are small now, they will grow. Let the lords of Westeros mock me at their peril." Jorah studied her with a hint of worry, but he made no further protest. She was his queen, and he believed in her. Perhaps seeing her unburnt by flame had done more to convince him than any argument. "As you say," he yielded. They pressed on. The red sun climbed higher, scorching the air. Despite the rigors, Daenerys did not waver. Her hair streamed behind her, half-scorched locks the color of pale moonlight. Her expression remained resolute, though the heat bled sweat into her eyes. She knew, on some level, how daunting her plan sounded. But in her soul, she felt the hammer beat of destiny. Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserion, that was what she had called her dragons, after her loved ones lost and her heritage. Drogon, the Black One, named for her fallen husband, carried Drogo's fierce spirit. Rhaegal, the Green One, carried the memory of her brother Rhaegar, the last great Targaryen warrior. Viserion, the White and Gold, for Viserys, though he had been cruel, he was still her blood. They were her living proof that the Targaryen line was not extinguished. As day melted into night, the Khalasar made camp near a low ridge of rock. Fires were lit, water was rationed. Daenerys walked among her people, offering words of encouragement. She listened to their grievances, saw the raw scrapes on children's feet. She summoned those who had once served as healers, instructing them to tend the injured. She had learned from her time with Drogo's Khalasar that a leader must see to the welfare of her followers. Fear alone would only last so long. Respect and loyalty could bind them far more deeply. In the far corners of the camp, men whispered about the dragons. Some scoffed. Others prayed to their own gods or invoked the great stallion to keep such strange beasts away. Yet when Daenerys walked by, carrying a small clay bowl of water for the hatchlings, those same men fell silent, uncertain whether to bow or flee. A sense of wonder, a sense of dread, it bound them to her. She settled near a central fire, the warmth dancing across her exhausted limbs. Her feet ached, her lips cracked from thirst. Jorah knelt beside her, handing her a strip of dried goat meat. Thank you, she murmured, gnawing it. The dryness turned to powder in her mouth, but she forced it down. Strength first, she told herself. A queen must nourish herself. Yora regarded the night sky. Sparse stars glimmered overhead. Tomorrow we ride again. Another hard day's travel. It will be weeks, perhaps months, before we reach Karth if we must skirt the Red Waste by safer routes. We risk roving Khalasars and slavers upon the way. Daenerys stroked Drogon's tiny spine, feeling the ridges of bone and the faint warmth of draconic flesh. Then we must outpace them or fight them if need be. The strong, she said, recalling a Dothraki proverb, do not run from shadows. She found her gaze falling upon the distant glow of the embers beyond the camp, remembering Drogo's funeral pyre. A pang of loss tightened her throat. But she allowed no tears. The time for tears had ended with the first crack of a dragon's shell. That was the hour her life changed forever. She had been reborn, not as a frightened young girl sold into marriage, but as Daenerys Stormborn, the mother of dragons, the rightful queen. They rode on for many days, forging eastward through rocky passes and the edges of the Red Waste. The heat was merciless. Winds scoured their skin with dust. Twice, they encountered small bands of brigands hoping to strip the Khalasar's stragglers for loot. The Dothraki horsemen scattered them easily, leaving blood-soaked sand in their wake. By the second week, more of the riders began to place their faith in Daenerys. They saw her endure hardship by their side, forging onward without complaint, offering water to children before she took her own portion. The dragons grew in small increments each day, devouring raw meat with surprising vigor. Their reptilian eyes gleamed and their tiny wings beat the air when they grew restless. They learned to hiss and snarl whenever a stranger drew too close. The Dothraki spoke in hushed voices of what wonders they might accomplish once these beasts grew large enough to be ridden. In the quiet hours before dawn, Daenerys would stand alone, letting the desert wind tug at her hair, looking to the shadowed horizon. Memories of Viserys haunted her. His talk of crowns and iron chairs, how his ambition curdled into cruelty. She would not be that sort of ruler. She remembered also the screams of women taken after battles, the casual brutality she had once witnessed among the Dothraki. She would not be that sort of conqueror, but she would be a conqueror, that much was certain. Something within her demanded it, like the beating of a distant drum. When the Khalasar finally reached the outskirts of a habitable region, where dusty towns began to appear, Daenerys sent out scouts. Some returned with news of a city of moderate size called Lazer's Edge, a trade post near a wide canal. Merchant ships sometimes passed by. Daenerys decided they would replenish their supplies there if possible. The journey had worn them thin. A place to acquire food, water, and perhaps coin for further travel was essential. She rode at the head of her people, wearing the grit of long travel like an extra layer of skin. Sunburn flared across her cheeks, but she kept her spine rigid. Yora galloped close by, scanning for any sign of ambush. As they neared Lazer's Edge, the city's mud-brick walls came into view. A cluster of spindly towers rose behind them. The gates stood open, though nervous city guards, armed with long spears, watched as the Dothraki columns approached. Daenerys had learned enough of this region's customs to know that the Dothraki were dreaded for their raids. She pressed her mount forward alone, Yora behind her but at a slight distance. She would speak for the Khalasar as a leader, not as a raider. At the gates, a guard captain, dusty turban wound around his head, squinted at her. He seemed uncertain what to make of a slight woman in tattered riding leathers, her skin stained by sun and sand. The basket that held the dragons, each one now the size of a large dog, shifted, and she could hear Drogon's raspy hiss from within. The guard paled. "I am Daenerys Stormborn," she declared, letting her voice carry. "I seek water and trade. Let your masters know I come in peace, to exchange goods, not to pillage." The guard was silent for a moment. Then he snapped a few words at one of his fellows who sprinted off into the city. They were uncertain but not immediately hostile. Likely they had heard rumors that a Khalasar was drawing near. The guard peered anxiously at the lines of Dothraki riders who waited in disciplined rows behind Daenerys. He swallowed. "My lady, your men will remain outside, yes? The city is not large and we fear." Daenerys lifted her chin. "I understand your fear, but my people need water. We will not all remain beyond the walls. I must see your merchants. If I am refused, we will move on, and Lazer's Edge will not see a single coin of my treasure." But know this, we are not beggars. We are not thieves. She forced a calm that belied her inner tension. Take me to your market. Let me speak with whoever is in charge. The guard hesitated, but eventually a figure in flowing orange robes approached, an older man, thin-faced, with carefully trimmed beard. He was introduced as the city's trade master. Biting his lip, the man regarded Daenerys. He saw the dragons, saw the hundreds of Dothraki, and perhaps realized that refusing them outright might provoke a siege. He bowed to Daenerys, albeit with trembling politeness. We are an open city, great rider, he said in halting Dothraki. We welcome travelers, so long as they come as friends. Daenerys slid from her horse, letting the reins hang. Yora dismounted beside her, sword sheathed but visible. We come as friends, she said. Show me your wares, and I will show you how friends treat each other. What followed was a tense negotiation. She allowed a select group of her Khalasar to enter the city and peruse its market district, carefully monitored by guards. The rest remained outside the walls under the watchful eye of Dothraki scouts. Inside, Daenerys observed narrow alleys filled with stalls that displayed dried fruits, goats, clay pots, and bits of copper jewelry. It was a poor city, or at least not a wealthy one. Yet it held precious water in its underground cisterns for which the city demanded trade. She bartered what little gold and valuables remained from Drogo's hoard. In exchange, she secured enough water skins and dried provisions to sustain the Khalasar for another stretch of their journey. During these dealings, she heard gossip from passing traders. Word had spread of war in the Seven Kingdoms. A new king in the north, they said. Another in the south. The Lannisters clinging to King's Landing. Dragons were rumored. Some men scoffed at the mention. Others whispered of a silver-haired queen in the distant east said to command a horde of savage riders. Daenerys listened to each rumor, quietly storing the knowledge. Her presence caused a stir in Laser's Edge. At one point, a merchant almost fainted when Drogon poked his black snout out of the basket and exhaled a small jet of flame at a passing stray dog. Fortunately, the dog yelped and ran off, singed but alive. The crowd parted around Daenerys after that. She felt the stares of both awe and apprehension, but no one dared raise a hand against her. That night, she pitched her own tent outside the walls, near a thin oasis of palm trees and a shallow pond that served as a watering hole for travelers. The stars above seemed sharper here, the sky a tapestry of glimmering lights. Dothraki riders guarded her perimeter. Kotho approached her tent flap once the city had gone quiet, uncertain how to speak to her. My blood, she said softly, acknowledging him. What news? He lowered his eyes. Khaleesi, some of the riders grow restless. We do not belong in the shadow of these mud walls, among foreigners. When will we ride again? She could see that while he had knelt before her after Hago's death, acceptance did not mean contentment. Soon, she promised. At first light, we will press on. I did not come here to linger. He nodded, but there was a question in his gaze. Khaleesi, if we ride to your homeland, will the men find worthy spoils? These Westerosi, do they fight well? Do their women? He trailed off, but Daenerys understood. The old ways of the Dothraki included reaving, enslaving, raping. She felt a chill of revulsion. She thought of the atrocities she had once witnessed and how she had tried to intervene. Could she truly control an entire Khalasar across the sea without them reverting to savage practices? You will find what your hearts desire, she said carefully. But under my banner, there will be new ways. The old savagery must yield to something greater. We do not butcher the weak or dishonor women. She let her tone sharpen. This is my will, Kotho. Is it understood? He bowed, but she could sense his confusion. It is as you say. Yet the glimmer in his eyes hinted that some part of the Dothraki spirit chafed against these restraints. She dismissed him, letting the concern gnaw at her. Leadership was not merely a crown to wear, it was a mantle of burdens. By the morning, the Khalasar departed, leaving Laser's Edge behind. The trade master watched from the gate, still trembling from the uncanny presence of the dragons. But Daenerys left the city unpillaged and mostly intact, an act that might sow a rumor of mercy in the region if not respect. Their next goal was more distant, more perilous, the route that would eventually lead them to Qarth. Over long, dusty leagues, the days became an unending cycle of scorching heat and ephemeral nights. They ventured deeper into the desert, sometimes glimpsing stone ruins, sometimes passing caravans that eyed them warily. A few caravans parted with additional supplies in exchange for the last remnants of Drogo's small hoard of gold ornaments. Daenerys parted with such baubles willingly. She had no illusions. Once in Qarth, she would need cunning more than pretty trinkets to gain the ships that would carry her across the sea. It was nearly a moon's turn before Qarth's legendary walls finally loomed on the horizon. They were said to be 3 walls, each grander than the last, etched with images of serpents, warlords, and dragons from ages past. As the Khalasar crested a rocky rise, Daenerys beheld those shimmering walls, the outer wall, taller than any structure she had seen, the middle wall, rumored to be embedded with precious stones, and the inner wall, white as pure marble. Beyond them rose the slender towers and domes of the greatest city in the east. The sky above was pale with midday glare, but from a distance, Qarth looked like a dream rising out of the desert. Yora drew alongside her, his brow beaded with sweat. "We have arrived," he said, though uncertainty threaded his voice. "The city of merchants and illusions." As they neared the towering gates, the splendor became more apparent. Guards in bright sashes and spired helms stood watch. Rich caravans lined up, awaiting entrance. Daenerys saw camels laden with spices, casks of wine, tapestries of vibrant hue. The air hummed with haggling voices in half a dozen tongues. Her dragons, grown now to perhaps the size of small hounds with stunted wings, perched in the shade of a makeshift canopy. They snapped at the flies that buzzed in the summer heat. A crier in swirling robes emerged, announcing himself as Piet Pri, a warlock of Qarth, or so he claimed. His skin was pallid, eyes ringed with a subtle violet stain, as though from lack of sleep or from consuming strange substances. He studied Daenerys, blinking slowly. "I have seen you in my visions," he declared, loud enough for passers-by to notice. "The mother of dragons, come at last." His pronouncement caused a stir. Some curious onlookers peered, enthralled by the sight of the scaled creatures near her. Merchants whispered behind raised hands. Dothraki riders remained alert, gripping reins and weapons. Piet Pri offered Daenerys a deep bow, more theatrical than genuine. "I am but a humble servant of the House of the Undying," he said. "We bid you welcome to Qarth, O Mother of Miracles. The pureborn will wish to see you, as will the 13 who rule within these walls." Though Yora's brow furrowed, Daenerys kept a measured smile. "I come seeking ships," she said. "Your city is known for its wealth. I have heard tales of the 13. If they hold the power to grant me passage across the sea, I would speak with them." Piet Pri's thin lips twitched into an unreadable grin. "Speak with them you shall. But beware, Daenerys Stormborn, Qarth is not as it seems. We are a city of illusions, a city of gilded masks. Behind every promise, there is a price." She thanked him coolly. A caravan official approached, demanding to know the Khalasar's size and intentions. Daenerys once again faced the same question. They would not allow so many armed horsemen to enter the city without limit. After a tense back and forth, it was agreed that a fraction of her riders, enough to serve as a protective guard, could enter, while the rest would camp in a designated area beyond the walls, provided Daenerys provided assurances and coin. She had little coin left, but Piet Pri intervened, telling the official that the House of the Undying would sponsor her entry as a guest of Qarth. In such a manner, Daenerys, her closest advisors, and a few dozen riders passed through the colossal gates into the outer city. The walls and architecture astonished her. Elaborate carvings, wide boulevards lined with tall, spindly trees, fountains with mosaic tiles. The colors and scents overwhelmed her senses. Perfumes, sizzling meats, dust, and incense mingling in the heavy air. The city teemed with life. Slaves in collars, merchants flaunting silks, warriors in polished armor, men and women from all corners of Essos and beyond. Qarth was truly a crossroads of the world. She set up her retinue in a spacious courtyard that Piet Pri provided as temporary quarters. It was a compound with high walls draped in flowering vines, a fountain in the center. The warlock vanished soon after, promising that he would alert the 13 to her presence. Daenerys wondered what manner of snare or boon might come of this. The dragons were restless, roving the courtyard on delicate claws, snapping at insects and lapping from the fountain. Their presence drew the attention of passers-by who dared to peek through the gates, awe etched on their faces. On the second day of her stay, emissaries from the 13 arrived, accompanied by the flamboyant Xaro Zoan Daxos. He was a tall, graceful man with ebony skin and a melodious voice. He wore shimmering robes embroidered with golden thread. A lavish chain of jade and platinum rested on his chest. He swept into the courtyard like a peacock. "Daenerys Stormborn, a pleasure beyond words to meet you at last," Xaro intoned, arms extended in greeting. "Qarth has awaited the return of dragons for an age and an age. You cannot imagine what a stir you have caused." Daenerys watched him carefully, uncertain whether to trust his effusiveness. "I thank you for your hospitality," she said, half bowing in the Carthene style. "I come seeking ships to cross the narrow sea. Will the 13 grant me what I need?" Xaro parted his painted lips in a brilliant smile. "All things are possible in Qarth, my sweet queen, if one has the means. Ships, armies, wealth, pleasures. You shall find them all. But come, let us speak more comfortably." He gestured to a line of palanquins and servants. "Allow me to host you in my humble mansion, where we might dine and discuss matters." Daenerys allowed it, though Yora's eyes flickered with caution. They traveled through the city, passing street musicians and exotic beasts in cages. Eventually, they reached a district of opulent palaces. Xaro's mansion was surrounded by tall walls of polished marble. Inside, it was a labyrinth of colonnades with pools of scented water reflecting hanging lanterns. Cushions of silk were piled in corners and slaves hurried to offer trays of fresh fruit and wine. They dined in a grand hall. Xaro lounged on a divan, regaling Daenerys with tales of his success as a merchant prince. His eyes rarely left the dragons which prowled about sniffing the air. Other members of the 13 observed quietly, merchants, mystics, traders of spices and precious metals. Some wore elaborate masks, others wore cunning smiles. "My sweet queen," Xaro began, leaning forward so that the lamplight caught the jewels in his hair. "You desire ships. Qarth can provide them. But to do so, I and my fellow 13 must be convinced of the value of such an investment. The voyage to Westeros is no small undertaking. It requires manpower, risk, wealth. What do we gain by backing your cause?" Daenerys chose her words with care. "I offer an alliance with the rightful queen of the 7 kingdoms. When I reclaim my father's throne, I will open new trade routes, grant you privilege to the resources of Westeros, and repay any debts with ample interest. You will be heralded as the friends of the Dragon Queen." She let her tone remain calm, though inside she felt the swirl of desperation. She had no coin, little to bargain with beyond her name and her dragons. An older merchant among the 13, a woman draped in pearls, spoke up. "Such promises, and yet the Targaryen claim in Westeros is long lost, is it not? The usurper dethroned your father many years ago. Now there is talk of multiple kings. How can we be sure you will prevail?" "I have the blood of the dragon," Daenerys answered. "And I have a Khalasar of fierce warriors." The woman's gaze flicked to Yora, then to the Dothraki who stood with arms crossed. "Formidable, no doubt," she said with a faint sneer. "But Westeros is large, with armies numbering in the tens of thousands. Your forces might be insufficient." A hush followed. Daenerys lifted her chin. "I have dragons," she said simply. At that, Drogon hissed as if on cue. Xaro's dark eyes glittered with fascination. A slender man in a mask like a jeweled butterfly clicked his tongue. "Ah, the fabled dragons. So small, though. How many years until they can lay waste to armies?" He paused, letting the question linger. Daenerys said nothing to that. She did not know how quickly they would grow, only that in legends, dragons who fed well could become monstrous in size within a handful of years. She prayed to whatever gods might listen that her children would thrive. Xaro clapped his hands, cutting the tension. Come. This is Qarth. We do not speak only of impossibilities. We speak of possibilities. Why not propose a more immediate arrangement?" He turned to Daenerys, his voice dropping to a silky near whisper. "Marry me, Daenerys Stormborn, and I shall lavish you with wealth beyond measure. I will buy the ships you need, hire the men to sail them, ensure your crossing. You need only bind our fortunes together. Surely that is not too great a sacrifice." The rest of the 13 watched intently. Yora bristled. Daenerys met Xaro's gaze. She knew from the stories told by Piet Pri that the man had married countless times, each union dissolving as soon as it was advantageous to do so. He was cunning, ambitious, and while he might fund her crossing, the price would be too great. She also sensed he coveted the dragons, for his eyes lingered upon them more than was polite. She shook her head, mustering a polite smile. "I am honored, but I cannot. My heart belongs to my quest and my late husband's memory. I do not seek to wed again for political convenience or to see my children bartered away." Xaro's expression flickered between disappointment and vexation. "A pity," he said softly. "Without such a binding, I fear I cannot sponsor an entire fleet. Perhaps my fellow 13 feel differently, but I suspect your request is premature." Daenerys forced herself to remain calm. "Then I will find another way." The meeting ended soon after. The 13 dispersed, each offering half-baked courtesies and compliments. Daenerys felt a slow burn of anger in her chest. These people were dazzled by her dragons, but not enough to risk their fortunes or politics. They sought advantage, not loyalty. Once the last of them departed, Xaro lingered, watching the dragons slither around the foot of a marble pillar. "Reflect on my proposal, sweet queen," he said. "I can give you everything you desire if you but give me a share of your wondrous future. Perhaps a trifling token, one dragon, in exchange for your ships? Or your hand in marriage, and I will fund an entire armada. Think on it." Daenerys turned from him. She would rather choke on desert sand than give up her children. Back at her compound, she gathered Yora and her few trusted blood riders in a circle beneath the glow of ornate lanterns. "The 13 will not give us ships freely," she said. "They want what I will not surrender, the dragons or my freedom." Yora offered a grim nod. "Then we must consider taking them." Kotho's eyes lit at the suggestion, but Daenerys cut him off. "No, we cannot simply seize ships from Karthus harbor. They are well guarded and the city is not easily cowed." She swallowed a wave of frustration. "We will remain a little while longer, gather what we can of their knowledge. Perhaps some among the 13 might be swayed by other means. If not, I will find another path. One way or another, I will reach Westeros." The following days were a dance of subtlety and intrigue. Daenerys attended lavish feasts, conversed with courtiers, each time refusing the offers to trade a dragon for a measure of gold or a handful of ships. She politely resisted Xaro's many attempts to court her. Meanwhile, rumors spread like wildfire that the mother of dragons had come, that the living flame of Valyria dwelt in Karth. Some saw her as a herald of a new era. Others feared her as an omen of doom. Her dragons, fed on raw meat from Karth's markets, began to test their wings, flapping short distances around the courtyard. Once or twice, Drogon spouted a thin jet of flame at a passing bird. Each day they grew. Some nights, Daenerys would watch them sleep curled beside her, the warmth of their scales a comfort she had never before known. Yet behind the city's veneer of splendor, Daenerys sensed the small traps closing in. She had glimpsed cloaked figures trailing her retinue in the marketplace. She overheard cryptic warnings from Piet Pri, whose warlock brethren regarded her with hungry interest. She realized that simply lingering in Karth might place her in danger. But if she departed too soon, she would have gained nothing. At last, a stroke of luck arrived in the form of a traveler from the Basilisk Isles, who claimed to have knowledge of a pirate lord who might be hired to ferry cargo for the right price. This traveler, a wiry man with missing teeth, asked a steep fee for the introduction. Daenerys paid with the last of her valuables. Then she and her people traveled to the port district, where junks and galleys from across the summer sea were moored. The air was thick with salt, fish, and the raucous hollers of seamen. There, in a dimly lit tavern reeking of stale beer, they met the so-called pirate lord of the Jade Straits, an older woman with steel-gray hair and a cunning eye. She named herself Captain Shenna. She listened to Daenerys's tale with amusement, glancing now and again at the basket that housed the drowsy dragons. 10 ships, Daenerys said. Enough to carry my people and their horses, plus supplies. Get us across the sea to Westeros. I will pay in future coin, once I reclaim my throne. Shenna barked a laugh. A promissory note from a Targaryen? You realize how that sounds. Daenerys's cheeks flushed. I realize your risk, but if you do this for me, I will make you a lord or lady of the seas. I will open Westeros's ports to your trade, reward you with gold, and ensure you sail safe from the crown's retribution. Shenna tapped her fingers on the scarred tabletop. And if you fail? A hush. Daenerys met her gaze firmly. I have no intention of failing. Yora placed a single gold locket, the last valuable from Daenerys's personal stores, onto the table. Shenna's eyes flickered with curiosity as she picked it up. The gold was embossed with the 3-headed dragon of House Targaryen. A down payment, Yora said. Shenna turned the locket over. Worth a bit, but not enough for me to sail blindly into war. I demand more, but you do have interesting trinkets. She raised an eyebrow at Daenerys. Rumor says you have 3 dragons. Is that true? Daenerys's stomach clenched. They are not for sale. Shenna shrugged. Didn't say I wanted to buy them, only that a demonstration might assure me you're the real deal. Daenerys rose, crossing to the basket. In the dim light, she coaxed Drogon out. He had grown heavier over the weeks, the length of his sinuous neck and tail now more pronounced. She whispered to him in High Valyrian, words that had come to her as if from a half-remembered lullaby. Drogon's eyes glinted red. He spread his wings, letting out a small rumble that echoed in the tavern. Patrons nearby froze in place, wide-eyed. Daenerys brought a scrap of salted meat to her palm. "Dracarys," she uttered. Drogon exhaled a sudden gout of flame, crisping the meat in an instant. Smoke curled upward. Captain Shenna's mouth parted in stunned silence. Then she burst into raucous laughter. "Now there's something you don't see every day," she said, leaning forward. "A baby dragon that spits fire. You might be mad, woman, but gods be damned if I'm not intrigued. I'll need more than that locket, though. That might buy you 1 ship, maybe 2. But 10? That's a fleet. And I'll need to pay my crew, feed them, account for losses if there's a war. I can't risk my neck for nothing more than a promise and a fancy trick." Daenerys's heart sank, though she kept her composure. She sensed Shenna wasn't dismissing her outright. She was bargaining. Daenerys could see the greed in the older woman's eyes. "I cannot surrender any of my dragons," she said. "Name something else." Shenna considered, tapping her chin. "A certain city beyond the Basilisk Isles threatens my trade. If I were assured of your help in eliminating that threat once you have an army in Westeros, perhaps that's worth a risk on my part. A contract, sealed in blood, that you will turn your might on them. Then you can repay me in gold once you've secured your throne." Daenerys exchanged a look with Yora. It was a complicated arrangement, entangling her in the older woman's vendettas. But it was better than relinquishing a dragon or marrying Xaro. "I would prefer not to make war at your whim," she said carefully. "But if these are men who prey on innocent vessels, perhaps we can come to a mutual understanding." Shenna bared her teeth in a grin. "Ah, yes, of course. They're nothing but scoundrels, allies of the worst slavers. You'd be freeing the seas of their filth. Once you have real power, you sail back to the Summer Sea and burn their fortresses. Simple, no?" Daenerys realized that to become a queen, she might have to strike alliances with unsavory figures. She forced a nod. "Very well. I will require enough ships to carry at least 800 riders, plus horses." "Pricey," Shenna said, scratching the scar on her jaw. "But I do love a good story, and the chance to say I once ferried the mother of dragons across the sea might be worth it. Right, let's see. I can gather that many ships within a fortnight, give or take. The men will want to be well paid in the end." Daenerys firmed her posture. "They shall be, once I sit the Iron Throne." They sealed the pact with a shared cup of spiced wine and the signing of a parchment in Shenna's presence. Daenerys felt the weight of that signature, for it bound her to a future conflict in the far reaches of the Summer Sea. But it was the best chance she had. And so began the final days in Qarth, as Daenerys worked feverishly to prepare. She sold what trifling items remained, acquiring casks of fresh water, salted meats, and feed for the horses. She had to keep the Dothraki from plundering the city in their impatience, occupying them instead with tasks of loading supplies and caring for the animals. Meanwhile, Xaro Xhoan Daxos made one last attempt to woo her, but she gently rebuffed him, carefully avoiding insulting the powerful merchant. Piet Pri lurked about, making eerie comments about the power of the dragons. Daenerys refused his invitations to the House of the Undying, mistrusting the warlock's arcane intentions. Captain Shenna proved true to her word. By the appointed time, she had assembled a ragtag fleet of brigs, cogs, and even a battered war galley anchored just outside Qarth's harbor. The ships were manned by sailors of questionable repute, but they obeyed Shenna's orders. Daenerys led her Khalasar through the winding streets to the harbor. Citizens of Qarth watched from balconies and rooftops, no doubt marveling at the sight of the horse lords departing with their silver-haired queen. Some might have been relieved to see them go without violence. Others might have been disappointed to see the dragons leave so soon. Boarding the ships proved a challenge. Many of the horses were skittish, and the Dothraki themselves were uneasy, never having set foot on the decks of such vessels. Several times, Frightened animals reared and bolted. The stench of fish, the creaking of timbers, and the lurch of the tide set the riders on edge. Daenerys walked among them, soothing them with quiet words, reminding them of the glory that awaited in Westeros. She felt their fear, too. She had never captained a fleet, and 1,000 dangers lay across the sea. But she could not relent. The swirling tide of destiny beckoned. She stood at the prow of the lead galley, hair whipping in the sea breeze. Her dragons perched on the rail, squawking at the unfamiliar sight of open water. Shienna barked orders from the quarterdeck, sails unfurling. The noon sun sparkled on the waves, bright and full of promise. Daenerys inhaled the brine-heavy air. This was it. She was leaving Essos behind with a united Khalasar, brandishing the uncertain loyalty of exiled knights and ferocious riders, carrying 3 dragons who were still small but growing stronger each day. If she reached Westeros, she would arrive at a time when the 7 kingdoms were tearing themselves apart with war. There might never be a better moment. As Karthus' skyline receded behind them, Daenerys closed her eyes for a moment. She thought of her brother Viserys, who had dreamed of such a crossing but never attained it. She thought of Drogo, whose power had opened the path for her. She thought of the Iron Throne, the seat of her forefathers. She tasted the salt on her lips and whispered a vow. "I am Daenerys Stormborn of House Targaryen," she murmured. "I will take what is mine with fire and blood." So the fleet cut westward across the deep, carrying the mother of dragons and her horde of horsemen, forging toward a realm that knew not what was coming. The crossing was perilous. Tempests battered them, sudden squalls that lashed the ships with howling winds and towering waves. More than once, Daenerys feared they would be swallowed by the raging sea, that her great gamble would end in watery darkness. Horses screamed in the holds, stamping their hooves in panic. Some died from sickness and had to be heaved overboard. A handful of Dothraki perished in the storms, cast into the churning depths by a shift of cargo or by a broken mast. Still, Shienna's skillful navigation guided them onward. When the storms abated, the sails caught fair winds that drove them steadily closer to the land of Daenerys' birth. Her dragons did not love the sea. Often they mewled and clung to her, unnerved by the vessel's swaying. But they continued to eat well, and Daenerys coaxed them to trust the open air. By the 3rd week, Drogon attempted short flights from mast to mast, though the crash of the ocean's swell sent him scrambling back in alarm. At last, a lookout hollered from the crow's nest of Shienna's flagship, "Land! Land to the west!" A shiver coursed through Daenerys. She rushed to the galley's prow, straining her eyes. Yes, there on the horizon lay a hazy green outline, rising from the sea like a beckoning hand. Westeros. It hardly felt real to her. She clutched the rail, trying to steady her breathing. Shienna approached. "I'd advise a southern landing," she said. "Dorne, maybe? I know of a cove beyond the official port. Smugglers' routes. Safer for unloading your unusual cargo." She smirked, eyes drifting to Daenerys' dragons. Daenerys nodded. "Yes. Dorne is said to be more tolerant of outsiders, and House Martell might yet be sympathetic to House Targaryen. It was Prince Doran Martell's sister who married my brother Rhaegar. A bond was once forged there." Shienna gave a quick, businesslike nod. "We'll aim for that cove then. Hold tight, there may be watchtowers or patrols along the coast. We'll have to do this quiet-like, if possible." The next day found them navigating the rocky coast of Dorne under a burning sun. Jagged cliffs rose high, crowned by scrubby brush. The sea shimmered turquoise in the calmer waters near shore. Shienna had her ships approach at intervals to avoid drawing too much attention. Still, Daenerys' heart hammered. She was on the edge of her homeland at last. The landing proved a frantic affair. Small boats ferried the Dothraki and their horses to the shore. Many of the riders complained bitterly about the cramped boats, cursing the sea in heated Dothraki oaths. Daenerys tried to calm them. One of Shienna's men nearly got himself stabbed after accidentally shoving a Dothraki aside in the confusion. Still, they made it, the horses splashing ashore on a lonely stretch of sand flanked by tall, weather-worn rocks. Salty air and the gulls' cries washed over them. It was late afternoon, the sun a glaring orb. Daenerys stood on that sand, letting the water lap at her ankles. She gazed inland at the sun-beaten hills of Dorne. This was Westeros, her father's kingdom. She closed her eyes, fighting a surge of emotion. They set up a makeshift camp beyond the tide line, hidden among the stony outcroppings. Tents were raised, horses corralled. Shienna's crew lingered with the ships moored offshore, keeping watch. Soon, Daenerys would need to pay them more than just promises. Shienna hovered with mild impatience, but also with the fascination of a gambler who has just placed a colossal bet. She wanted to see if Daenerys would truly conquer. Dusk fell, painting the sky in purple and gold. Torches flickered in the campsite, but they were carefully shielded to avoid drawing undue attention. Jorah joined Daenerys at the crest of a small dune that overlooked their ragtag encampment. "Khaleesi," he said quietly, reverting to the Dothraki honorific. "We are here, but the real battle awaits. Already, the realm is fractured. The War of the Five Kings rages. The Starks hold the north, King Joffrey sits the Iron Throne in King's Landing, Stannis wages war in the south, rumor says Renly Baratheon was murdered by dark sorcery, but that leaves Tyrell alliances in question. And what of the Lannisters? They command the King's Landing garrison. The Tyrells hold the Reach, the Martells hold Dorne. The Greyjoys raid the coasts. It is a nest of scorpions. We must choose our next move carefully." Daenerys looked at the flicker of torches, at her dragons curled around a small cookfire, hissing softly as they tore into scraps of goat meat. Then she looked inland, to the hidden roads that led to the great houses of Dorne. "We will send an emissary to Sunspear, the seat of House Martell," she decided. "They harbored no love for the Lannisters after what happened to Elia Martell. Perhaps they will see in me the chance to avenge her children. If they stand by me, we gain a foothold in Westeros." Jorah nodded. "And if they don't? Then we carve our own path," Daenerys said, though she forced steel into her voice to mask her own flicker of dread. "I am done being turned away. The realm is broken. I will restore it." She paused, remembering how her ancestors had come with dragons and forged a new order. Hers were still small, but day by day they grew. The Dothraki riders, hardened by the crossing, were thirsting for battle. If House Martell refused, she would ride north, forging alliances through force or diplomacy wherever she could. The Iron Throne was not so distant now. That night, she stood under a sky ablaze with stars. The crackle of the campfires, the soft snorting of horses, the whisper of waves on the sand. It was all a lullaby of possibility. Tomorrow she would send word to Sunspear. Tomorrow she would begin the next step of her conquest. She smiled faintly at the memory of Khal Drogo's words long ago. "I will give you the 7 kingdoms." He had promised to cross the sea for her, but it was she who had crossed, with his spirit guiding her. The ghost of his voice seemed to echo on the breeze. Mother of dragons, breaker of chains, she would be called in time. But in this hour, as the tide gently ebbed, she was simply Daenerys Targaryen, child of storm, bride of fire, come at last to reclaim her birthright. Morning arrived, crisp and bright, glinting off the dunes. She rose, dressed in leathers that still bore the dust of Essos, and emerged from her tent to find the Khalasar awakening. The men readied horses, stirring from the cramped, uncomfortable rest. She could smell the tang of horse sweat, sea salt, and cooking fires. A gull screeched overhead. Her dragons greeted her with low rumbles. Drogon flapped up to her shoulder, heavier now, but still determined to perch there. She let out a soft laugh, stroking his scaled neck. Jorah approached alongside Kotho. "It is time," Daenerys said. "Gather a small party of riders. We will send them under a banner of peace to Sunspear. They will carry my words to Prince Doran Martell." She squared her shoulders. "I will speak not only of alliances and revenge but of liberation, of my birthright. If they remember Elia and Rhaegar, they may join me." Kotho snorted. "Why not ride ourselves and demand their fealty at the tip of an arak?" Daenerys set her gaze on him. "Because we are not butchers, Kotho. If we earn their loyalty, we will be stronger. Spilling blood is not always the answer." The Dothraki man scowled but held his tongue. So a delegation of 6 riders, led by a Westerosi knight who spoke the common tongue well, set off along the coastal roads to Sunspear. Daenerys waited in uneasy anticipation, spending the days drilling the Khalasar in horse maneuvers, organizing supply lines with Shienna's help, and sending scouts to gauge the state of the war. The latter brought back tidings of chaos. King's Landing was in uproar, King Joffrey's rule propped up by his grandfather Tywin Lannister. The north was locked in conflict under King Robb Stark. Stannis Baratheon had marched on King's Landing but was repelled at the Blackwater by cunning and wildfire. Renly was dead, leaving the Tyrells to side with the Lannisters. The Greyjoys were raiding the northern coast. Westeros groaned under the weight of civil war. This news both encouraged Daenerys and unnerved her. A divided kingdom might be ripe for conquest, but the alliances she had hoped to forge might be unstable. She had to move swiftly and with purpose. Finally, her riders returned, bearing a summons sealed with the Sun and Spear sigil of House Martell. Prince Doran Martell invited Daenerys to Sunspear for talks of an alliance. The letter's tone was cautious but intrigued. "The blood of Elia flows in the halls of Sunspear," it read in elegant script. "We remember the horrors visited upon her and her children. If you are indeed a Targaryen returned, come and speak with us. But come in peace without an army at your heels." Daenerys read it aloud to Yora and her advisors. "He calls me to come alone or with a small retinue. But that might be dangerous." Yora nodded. "Dorne is a proud land. They have little reason to betray you, though. If Prince Doran wanted to destroy you, he could simply refuse you entry or alert the Iron Throne. My sense is he truly wants to meet you in person. The Martells hate the Lannisters for what happened to Elia. And your brother Rhaegar was beloved by many in Dorne. This might be our best chance." So Daenerys decided to trust. She would leave the bulk of the Khalasar in their hidden camp with Kotho in command while she led a small escort to Sunspear. She would bring her dragons to show Prince Doran the living proof of her claim. Shienna would remain behind as well, keeping watch over her ships. Thus began a cautious journey across arid hills, weaving through dusty roads that led deeper into Dorne. The sun beat down mercilessly, but it was nothing compared to the red waste of Essos. Daenerys felt an odd sense of familiarity with the climate, like a distant cousin to the land she had left behind. They passed small hamlets of red clay roofs where small folk peered in curiosity at the band of strangers. Yora wore a simple cloak, hooded to shield against the sun. Daenerys let her silver hair flow, wanting none to mistake her identity. The dragons rode in wicker cages slung over spare horses, peering out at the world with restless curiosity. When at last they glimpsed the sandstone towers of Sunspear rising from the coastal sprawl, Daenerys' heart thudded. She was no longer an exiled beggar queen. She rode to meet a prince of Dorne on near-equal footing. At the city gates, a contingent of Dornish guards in flowing orange cloaks waited. They eyed the dragons with awe. The captain of the guard offered Daenerys a polite bow. "Welcome to Sunspear, Daenerys Targaryen. His Highness Prince Doran awaits you within the Tower of the Sun." They dismounted, leaving most of their horses in the care of stable hands. Daenerys insisted on carrying the dragons herself, letting Drogon perch upon her shoulder while Rhaegal and Viserion followed, tethered by light chains in the hands of a trusted Dothraki. A hush fell as they walked through the courtyard, past water gardens and stone pillars carved with swirling designs. Courtiers paused to stare. Murmurs rippled, "Targaryen, dragons." In a large hall open to the sea breeze, Prince Doran Martell awaited on a cushioned seat. He was a middle-aged man with a thick mustache, heavy-lidded eyes, and a gentle air that belied a sharper mind. He was accompanied by his daughter, Arianne Martell, a striking young woman with dark, curling hair and alert eyes. Nearby stood the tall, broad-shouldered figure of Oberyn Martell, wiry with a dangerous grace in his posture. The Red Viper. Daenerys recognized him from distant rumors. She moved forward, gave a respectful bow. "Prince Doran," she said, voice steady. "I am Daenerys Stormborn, of the blood of the dragon." Drogon hissed softly at her side, as if echoing her. The prince's eyes flicked to the dragons, then back to Daenerys. He inclined his head. "You honor us with your visit, Your Grace." He spoke the word grace carefully, as if testing its fit. "We have heard tales, of course, but seeing dragons with my own eyes is a marvel. Be welcome in Sunspear. Let us speak as friends if we can." Daenerys smiled. The next step of her war for the Iron Throne was beginning. She knew not how the Dornish Lienza would unfold, but she felt the weight of possibility pressing on all sides. And in her heart she carried the memory of that funeral pyre, the night she had been reborn with flame. She stood on Westerosi soil now, forging alliances with those who had once been allies to House Targaryen. She had a Khalasar at her back, 3 dragons at her side, and a realm in chaos before her. All that remained was to fan the sparks of war into a blaze that would sear her name into the annals of history, a blaze that would grant her the Iron Throne or consume her entirely. She was Daenerys Targaryen. She would not falter. She would not fail. The wheel was turning, and she intended to break it. Fire and blood. The words beat in her pulse as she stepped forward, greeting House Martell in a land she meant to claim. It was only the beginning of the tale of the queen who crossed the sea too soon, or perhaps just in time. One way or another, the 7 kingdoms would tremble at the sound of dragon wings once more. Daenerys stood in the airy hall of Sunspear, acutely aware that the fate of her fledgling campaign in Westeros might hinge upon what transpired in the coming hour. Prince Doran Martell's expression was measured, careful. Behind him, Oberyn Martell loomed with a leonine grace, assessing every nuance of Daenerys's bearing. Arianne Martell, poised and elegant, watched the dragons with bright, inquisitive eyes. The Dornish entourage radiated curiosity and tension in equal measure. Around them, the warm Dornish breeze stirred colorful banners depicting the sun and spear of House Martell. Daenerys' own banner was not unfurled. She had few banners to display, but the dragons at her side served as the most potent sigil of all. Drogon perched protectively at her shoulder, his claws kneading the leather of her sleeve. Rhaegal and Viserion, tethered by light chains held by Drogo and Aggo, hissed softly whenever a curious courtier ventured too close. Doran inclined his head in greeting, though he did not rise from his cushioned seat. He moved slowly, as if each gesture was part of a deliberate ritual. "Welcome," he said in a voice like distant thunder muffled by thick drapes. "I have heard many tales from across the narrow sea. Dragons reborn into the world in the wake of Khal Drogo's death. A young Targaryen queen leading Dothraki riders across the desert and the seas. Not long ago, I would have dismissed such fables. But here you stand." Daenerys inclined her head in turn. "I thank you for receiving me, Prince Doran. I know House Martell has reason to distrust the Iron Throne as it stands today. I remember, or at least I have been told, of the crimes committed against your sister Elia and her children. My brother Rhaegar," she hesitated, swallowing. She had never known Rhaegar in life, but she had gleaned pieces of his story through Viserys and Ser Jorah. He wed Elia out of both love and alliance, so the histories say. The fruit of that union was your niece, your nephew, They were murdered, Oberyn interjected with a quiet snarl. His voice carried steel beneath its calm surface. By Gregor Clegane and his ilk, acting under the orders of Tywin Lannister, or so it has long been suspected. Daenerys felt the pulse of tension. She reminded herself that these Dornish lords lived every day with memories of that horror. "I come to you now," she continued, "not to dredge up your grief, but to assure you that House Targaryen remembers its friends. The Seven Kingdoms are in chaos. I would restore order. More than that, I would restore justice. But I cannot do this alone. If you will help me, if you will ally with me, I promise that when I claim the Iron Throne, the blood on House Lannister's hands will not go unanswered." Doran's expression remained inscrutable, though a flicker of interest glimmered behind his eyes. "Tell me, Daenerys Targaryen, how do you propose to seize the throne? The realm is a battlefield. The Lannisters hold King's Landing, with the Tyrells now joined to them through Margaery's betrothal to King Joffrey. Stannis Baratheon lurks on Dragonstone, bruised from defeat yet not without cunning. The North is rallied behind King Robb Stark, and the Ironborn raid the coastlines. Amid such turmoil, by what means do you plan to triumph?" "I have a Khalasar from the Dothraki Sea," Daenerys replied, letting a small edge of pride ring in her voice. "Hundreds of horsemen, each a fearsome warrior. I have ships, though not many, secured through a temporary pact. Most importantly, I have dragons." At that, Drogon shifted on her shoulder, emitting a low rumble that made a few nearby Dornish guards flinch. Small though they may seem, they grow stronger each day. A single dragon, once grown to adulthood, can turn the tide of battle. My ancestors proved that when they first united Westeros under Aegon the Conqueror. Across the hall, a hush fell. Doran tapped an index finger against his armrest. "Dragons," he murmured. "Legend has taught us the devastation they can unleash. But your dragons are babes. How soon until they might truly serve as instruments of war? 2 years? 5? More? We know not how quickly they grow. From what I've gleaned," Daenerys said, "they can grow fast, provided they feed well. The lore on dragons is sparse, but I have reason to believe they will mature sooner than many expect. And they need not be fully grown to strike fear into the hearts of my enemies or to harm them with fire." Oberyn Martell stepped forward, eyeing Drogon's gleaming black scales. "What is to stop you from turning that fire on us if ever we displease you? Dorne has seen betrayal before, from Targaryens and Baratheons alike." Daenerys held his gaze. "I do not come as a conqueror to burn those who might be my friends. I come to right the wrongs done to House Martell and to House Targaryen. My alliance is freely offered. If you join me, I will not forget it when I sit the Iron Throne. I will restore the alliance that once existed between your house and mine." Arianne shifted. Daenerys saw the flicker of interest in her eyes. "And how do you propose to treat with the other great houses?" Arianne asked. "The Tyrells are bound to the Lannisters. The Stormlands may be in disarray, but there are lords who might still follow Stannis. The North is under the Young Wolf. Have you a plan to bring them to your cause? Daenerys drew a breath. Many in Westeros resent the Lannisters. The Starks wage war already to avenge their father, Eddard. The Riverlands are bleeding under Lord Tywin's campaigns. And the Ironborn have carved their own path of destruction. I believe some lords would rise for me in time if I show them I can break the Lannisters and restore stability. But first, I must plant my banner on these shores openly and with the backing of a great house. That is why I have come to Dorne. Prince Doran arched a brow, hands folded in his lap. So you wish to make Dorne the beachhead of your war? Do you expect me to raise my banners immediately, march against the Iron Throne, and proclaim for House Targaryen? That is no small matter. It would bring ruin upon my people if we fail. It would bring the wrath of the Iron Throne down upon us with the combined might of the Lannisters and Tyrells, not to mention whichever Baratheon might find cause to intervene. Daenerys' heart pounded. She glanced at Jorah, who stood behind her, watchful, offering no words unless asked. I do not propose to fling Dorne into open war without caution, she said. You know your lands best, my prince. You know which houses within Dorne are loyal, which might resist a renewed Targaryen alliance. If we proceed, we should do so with cunning. But I ask this, offer me your support in principle, feed and shelter my Khalasar if needed, and stand with me when the moment is right. In return, you have my sworn vow that the murders of Elia Martell and her children will be avenged, and Dorne will be granted broad autonomy and respect within my restored realm. Doran listened in silence for a moment, his gaze drifting to Oberyn, then to Arianne. A subtle interplay of glances passed among them. Daenerys sensed that these three had already planned for some eventuality involving the Targaryens. How could they not, given their family's history? She wondered how much they had anticipated this day, or if they truly believed she was alive at all. Oberyn folded his arms. We have not forgotten the dragon yet, nor have we forgiven Tywin Lannister. And the boy king, Joffrey, sits on the throne with Lannister gold at his back and a Tyrell bride in his future. I have sworn to see justice for Elia's children. That oath remains. His gaze flicked back to Daenerys. If you truly mean to reclaim your birthright, you may find no truer allies in the Seven Kingdoms than the Martells. But if you fail us, I will not fail, Daenerys said, her voice firm, though she felt the weight of doubt pressing in on her. I cannot. Arianne's lips curved into the barest smile. Then there is much to discuss. Father. Doran inclined his head in a minuscule nod. Yes, he said softly. Let us speak of alliances in private. He glanced around at the gawking courtiers. Oberyn, remain. Arianne, remain. The rest, leave us. We will speak with the Khaleesi and her advisors alone. The Dornish nobles who had gathered drifted out, murmuring curiosity to one another. Daenerys beckoned Jorah forward. She had told him ahead of time that he would be her voice when it came to the complexities of Westerosi politics, for he knew them better than she, though she had studied. Two of her Dothraki remained, gently holding the chains to Rhaegal and Viserion. They were uneasy in the echoing hall, so different from the wide skies and rolling plains they had known most of their lives. But they stood stoic and silent. Once the hall had cleared, Oberyn led them to a side chamber open to a courtyard. The walls were adorned with Dornish tapestries depicting blazing suns and coiling serpents. A breeze off the sea drifted in, stirring the curtains. Nearby, a burbling fountain provided a soft melody of water. Daenerys gestured for her Dothraki to wait just inside the door while she, Jorah, and Drogon followed the Martells further in. Doran settled onto a low divan, wincing slightly as he moved his legs. Oberyn propped himself against a pillar, arms crossed. Arianne stood behind her father, one hand resting lightly on his shoulder. A hush fell as Daenerys took a seat opposite them. Jorah remained standing at her side. Prince Doran steepled his fingers. You speak of an alliance, Daenerys Targaryen, yet you have not told me precisely what role you envision Dorne playing in this war, nor what timeline you foresee. Do you plan to strike King's Landing at once? Or gather strength first? Will you call upon the other great houses and hope for them to turn on the Lannisters? I've only just arrived on these shores, Daenerys said, keeping her voice respectful. My immediate need is a secure foothold. My Khalasar is encamped near the coast, hidden for now, but not indefinitely. I cannot merely dash at King's Landing with a few hundred Dothraki. The city's walls are high, and the Lannisters have thousands of men. The Tyrell alliance has brought them fresh troops and supplies. A direct assault would be suicide. A wise admission, Doran said. So we must proceed carefully, Daenerys continued. I propose we quietly move my forces into Dorne, in a place of your choosing where they can be fed and sheltered without drawing too much attention. Then we spread word discreetly to the lords of Dorne that House Targaryen has returned and that House Martell looks upon that return with favor. You know which houses are fierce in their loyalty to your rule. If they accept your guidance, they will follow. In time, we can muster an army under the Dornish sun out of the Lannisters' immediate reach. And you expect the rest of the realm not to notice a horde of Dothraki in Dorne? Oberyn asked pointedly. We can keep them scattered, hidden in separate valleys, perhaps. Dorne is vast and includes many desert stretches that might be reminiscent of what my people know. The Dothraki do not fear harsh terrain. They will adapt. As we bide our time, we can gather intelligence on how the war unfolds further north. Once an opportunity arises, perhaps if the Lannisters are drawn into conflict with the North again, or if Stannis musters new strength, we strike. Arianne studied Daenerys. And what do you require from us beyond secrecy and safe harbor? Guidance, Daenerys said. Provisions, horses if possible, a place to train my men in Westerosi tactics. Most of my Dothraki are cavalry, but city sieges may require additional knowledge. Perhaps you have engineers, men who understand siege weaponry or infiltration. I have only Ser Jorah to counsel me in such matters, and though I trust him, we can always learn more. Doran exchanged a glance with Oberyn. The Red Viper gave a slight nod as if in agreement with some unspoken plan. Dorne can provide those things, Doran said. But what do we gain from this beyond the promise of vengeance on the Lannisters? Daenerys met his gaze. When I sit the Iron Throne, I will see to it that the killers of Elia and her children are brought to justice. Gregor Clegane, Tywin Lannister, those who conspired in such crimes. If they live, they will die. If House Lannister still clings to power, I will strip them of their lands and titles. I will restore the old alliance between House Targaryen and House Martell. I will grant Dorne the right to govern itself with even greater autonomy than the other regions, in keeping with your proud history and distinct culture. You will be my trusted ally and friend, the spear at the side of the dragon. Oberyn's lips curved into something resembling a satisfied sneer. And what of your personal union? Many alliances are forged by marriage. Suppose we propose a match with one of our own to cement this bond. A flutter of unease passed through Daenerys. Marriage alliances were the coin of royalty, she knew. Her brother Viserys had always told her she would be wedded off for advantage. She had already wed once to Drogo, though that had not been forced upon her quite the same way. She was not blind to the possibility that she might one day marry again to secure her throne. But she was unprepared for the suggestion to arise so directly here. She hesitated. I am not opposed to the idea in principle. But I have no wish to marry someone I do not know simply for politics. My heart is still raw from Khal Drogo's passing. And there are many complications yet to address. Perhaps we can first forge a military alliance and see what the future holds. Oberyn shrugged. As you wish. I speak only of possibilities. My brother is right. Alliances in Westeros often require more than just words. Arianne placed a calming hand on Oberyn's arm, then offered Daenerys a polite nod. Let us not hasten that discussion. There is time. Doran reached for a goblet of Dornish wine that a servant had quietly set at his side. He sipped, then set it down. Very well, Daenerys Targaryen. I will give you my word that Dorne will shelter your people. We will keep your presence concealed as best we can for as long as possible. In return, I expect your solemn vow that once you are ready to reveal yourself, and once we move to challenge the Iron Throne, you do not waver. We will be risking our own position and the safety of our people in supporting you. Daenerys rose from her seat, Drogon shifting with a hiss. She kept her head high, ignoring the pang of nerves in her gut. You have my vow as Daenerys Stormborn of the blood of the dragon. Fire and blood will be the fate of our enemies. Doran inclined his head. So be it. We have much to plan. That evening, Daenerys and her small escort were shown to well-appointed chambers in a secluded wing of Sunspear, far from the eyes of visitors. The accommodations were more comfortable than anything she had experienced in many moons. Cushions of fine fabric, a bed with soft linens, and a private balcony overlooking the sea. She set the dragons at ease by letting them prowl the room, though they left small scratch marks on the tiled floor as they explored. She found a measure of relief in the knowledge that the Martells had agreed to support her cause, at least in secret. But she could not banish her sense of urgency. The war in Westeros raged. Each day that passed was a day for the Lannisters to tighten their hold, or for some new development to shift the balance of power. She wanted to move quickly, to strike. Yet she knew she must abide by Doran's caution. A rash move would be her downfall. Ser Jorah joined her on the balcony, leaning against the carved stone balustrade. His hair was tousled by the desert wind, and the lines of worry etching his face seemed deeper than ever. "You spoke well today, Khaleesi." She pressed her lips together. "Thank you, Ser Jorah, but I feel as though I'm dancing on the edge of a blade. The Martells offer hospitality, but do I truly trust them? They have reason to support me, yet they are cunning. Prince Doran measures every word." "That's his way," Jorah said. "He's known to be patient, some say too patient, but always thinking 2 moves ahead. Oberyn is more impulsive, yet no less dangerous. The man is called the Red Viper for good reason. Still, the Martells detest the Lannisters. That hatred is genuine. I think it will bind them to us at least until Tywin Lannister is brought low." Daenerys stared out at the darkening sea. Pinpricks of torchlight from Sunspear's harbor dotted the coastline. "We must hope so. For now, we do as they suggest. Keep our presence hidden and gather our strength. Tomorrow, I'll ride out to the camp with one of their trusted men, show my people where they can move inland." Jorah nodded. "It will be a challenge to keep so many Dothraki hidden. But if any land can do it, perhaps Dorne can. Its deserts and canyons have concealed many outlaws and armies over the centuries." She turned away from the vista, glancing inside at her dragons. Rhaegal was curled around a leg of the bed, gently gnawing at the wooden post, while Viserion flapped his wings near an open window, curious about the night air. Drogon hissed at them both, protective of Daenerys. The sight warmed her heart. They had grown in size and confidence. Soon, she hoped they would hunt on their own, taking flight for longer stretches. In time, they would be unstoppable. The next day, she rose with the dawn. A sandy-haired Dornish captain named Ser Lothier led her and Jorah out of Sunspear along winding roads that cut through the dusty hills. 2 of her Dothraki blood riders accompanied them, their braided hair swinging as they rode. They carried the chains for Viserion and Rhaegal, while Drogon perched upon Daenerys' shoulder, watchful and silent. The captain assured them that Prince Doran had arranged for a discreet site some leagues inland where the Khalasar could relocate. It was an arid valley ringed by rocky escarpments, dotted with patches of tough grasses and scrub brush that might sustain horses. There was a small oasis, a pond fed by an underground spring. The region was seldom traveled by outsiders, and Doran's men could guard the passes to keep away prying eyes. They reached Daenerys' camp by midday. The Dothraki had pitched tents amid the jagged rocks near the shore. Horses paced nervously near the water's edge, none too fond of the sea. Captain Lothier stared at the spectacle, hundreds of swarthy riders milling about, many wearing vests of horsehair or boiled leather, their eyes bright with curiosity and distrust. The Dothraki parted before Daenerys, making way as she rode to Kotho, who stood near a small fire. He looked up, scowling at the stranger in Dornish colors. "Khaleesi," Kotho said. "Our scouts spotted men riding near the cliffs. Were they yours?" "They belong to our new friends in Dorne," Daenerys said, dismounting. Her boots sank into the sand. Drogon leapt from her shoulder, landing with a hiss on a nearby drift of sand where he left a faint trail of footprints. "We will be moving soon, further into the land, away from the sea. There is an oasis hidden from prying eyes. The prince of this land has promised us refuge. Have the men prepared to ride." Kotho's lip curled. "Hiding? Is that what we do now?" Daenerys frowned. "We do as I command. We bide our time, gathering strength. You have heard me speak of the city we must conquer, the one with walls of stone? We cannot simply gallop in as if it were a Lazarene village. We must plan, or we die." The Dothraki blood rider looked as though he might argue further, but he bowed his head stiffly. "As you say." Still, the tension in his jaw did not fade. It reminded Daenerys that a Khalasar was as dangerous to itself as to its enemies if its leader did not keep it united. She forced steel into her voice. "Tell the riders, we set out by midday tomorrow. The horses will drink, and we will leave no trace of ourselves here on the shore. Should anyone come upon this camp after we depart, they must find it abandoned." Kotho stalked away to relay her orders. Meanwhile, Daenerys conferred with Ser Lothier and Jorah about the route inland. The trek would not be easy. The Dothraki would have to navigate rocky passes and hot, stony gullies. But, as Jorah pointed out, the desert was still more hospitable than the trackless red waste they had once survived. When the time came, the Khalasar rode out in winding columns, guided by the Dornishman and a few of his scouts. The horses whickered, snorting at the strange terrain, while the riders kept a wary eye on the steep canyon walls. Daenerys rode at the head, feeling an odd sense of relief to be leaving the sea behind. She had crossed it, and that crossing still felt like a half-remembered nightmare. Now she was in Westeros, forging deeper into the land that was rightfully hers. Each hoofbeat carried her closer to her destiny, even if it also carried her into greater danger. They traveled all day. By dusk, they reached the oasis that Doran had promised. It was little more than a rocky basin dotted with a scattering of date palms and a shallow pond. But to the Dothraki, it was a near paradise in the midst of scorched badlands. They dismounted and watered their horses. Children laughed as they splashed in the pond. Women set about unpacking tents. Within a matter of hours, the barren valley hummed with the bustle of a new encampment. A small Dornish garrison occupied a stone watchtower on a ridge overlooking the valley. By arrangement with Doran, they would guard the approaches and signal if any hostile force approached. Daenerys walked the perimeter with Yora, assessing the natural defenses. The valley's cliffs would shield them from casual observation, but if a determined army came, they could be trapped. A risk, she thought, but one they had to accept for now. That night, Daenerys shared a simple meal of flatbread and roasted goat with her blood riders. Her dragons prowled in the torchlight, devouring scraps of meat. Dothraki children squealed with both delight and fear whenever Drogon or Viserion snapped in their direction. The older riders kept a wary distance. Some admired the dragons as harbingers of glory, others muttered about witchcraft. Daenerys felt the subtle currents of doubt. She reminded herself that these men would follow a call who showed strength and success in battle. That was their way. If she could not provide them with battle and plunder soon, would they remain loyal? She tried not to let that fear show. During the following weeks, secrecy ruled Daenerys's actions. Scouts from the Martells ensured that no caravans stumbled upon the valley unawares. Prince Doran sent wagons of supplies under the cover of night, grain, dried fruits, salted meats, and barrels of water. Sometimes the wagons carried newly forged spears, bows, and other weapons. Dornish smiths among Doran's retinue had begun crafting arms suited for the Dothraki style of warfare, combining the curved Arak concept with Westerosi steel. Daenerys saw the faint beginnings of an army that might one day challenge King's Landing. Yora and a handful of Dornish soldiers taught the Dothraki how to scale walls with ropes and crude grapnels, how to form up in ranks when facing disciplined infantry. It was a jarring change for men accustomed to swirling cavalry tactics on open plains, but Daenerys insisted they learn. Meanwhile, she sought out any knowledge she could find on the finer points of siegecraft. Books were scarce in the camp, but Prince Doran occasionally sent scrolls or small treatises. By flickering lantern light in her tent, Daenerys pored over them, gleaning details on catapults, battering rams, the weaknesses of different fortress designs. She did not relish the idea of turning to such brutish methods, but until her dragons were larger, she could not rely solely on draconic might. Oberyn Martell visited the oasis at times, as though impatient to see progress with his own eyes. He often arrived unannounced, accompanied by only a small retinue of lightly armed men. Striding into Daenerys's presence with the confidence of a seasoned warrior, he would greet her politely, inquire about the dragon's growth, and then watch the Dothraki training with a predatory gleam in his dark eyes. On one such visit, he found Daenerys standing by the pond at dusk, her dragons perched on nearby rocks. Rhaegal and Viserion were the size of large hounds by now, while Drogon was notably bigger. More aggressive too. Daenerys was tossing scraps of meat into the air for Drogon to snatch in mid-flight, honing his reflexes. Oberyn approached quietly. "They grow fast," he said, voice low so as not to startle Drogon. "A marvel to see. I never thought to lay eyes on living dragons." Daenerys cast him a sideways glance. "They have a great deal more growing to do, Prince Oberyn." He smirked. "But even small dragons can kill, I imagine." "They can. If threatened, they will breathe fire. Drogon is the fiercest. He has singed the hair off more than one rider who got too close." She turned back to Oberyn. "Will Prince Doran and House Martell keep faith? I worry each day that word might reach King's Landing." Oberyn's expression flickered with a note of sympathy. "We have spies on the lookout. So far, none suspect that a horde of Dothraki is squatting in a hidden Dornish valley. The war preoccupies everyone else. The Lannisters and Tyrells remain wary of Stannis making another move. The North battles on under Robb Stark, though I hear rumors of fractures in his alliances. Balon Greyjoy stirs havoc on the western coasts. This realm bleeds from all sides, and no one is looking south quite yet. Daenerys exhaled, half relieved. But they will eventually. And by that time, I need to be ready. Your readiness depends on more than just swords and lances, Oberyn said, adopting a thoughtful tone. It depends on forging alliances. Perhaps with the Tyrells if they tire of the Lannisters. Or the Storm Lords if Stannis fails them. Or the River Lords if they break from the Iron Throne. And what of the North? Could you ally with the king in the North? Daenerys had considered that question often. She knew how Stark had no love for the Lannisters, but she also knew the Starks had little reason to embrace a Targaryen. If Robb Stark was wise, he might see we share a common foe, she said. But from all I hear, the North is proud, and the young king's supporters might not welcome a Targaryen queen claiming dominion. They remember my father's madness, how he burned Lord Rickard Stark. Oberyn's voice hardened. Aerys Targaryen did worse to my sister's children after that war was over. Yet here I stand, speaking to his daughter in friendship. The past can be forgotten if there is a will to do so. Daenerys nodded, though a part of her flinched at any mention of her father's atrocities. Yes, let us hope the North can see beyond old hatreds if it serves them. But I cannot rely on that. Their conversation was interrupted by the crackling rush of flame behind them. Drogon had belched a short jet of fire, lighting a tuft of dried grass ablaze. Daenerys hurried to stomp it out, ignoring Oberyn's amused grin. He bowed slightly and took his leave, as though content to let her manage her temperamental child. With the passing of weeks, Daenerys's camp settled into a cautious routine. The Dothraki grew restless, for they were used to raiding and riding across endless plains, not waiting in a hidden valley. She tried to keep them occupied with training, reminding them of the plunder and glory awaiting when they finally attacked the stone city that held the Iron Throne. Kotho, still her most vocal critic, grumbled loudest about the lack of open battle. Daenerys confronted him one morning when he aired his grievances in front of dozens of riders. "You call yourself a Khal," he said, sneering. "Yet we do not ride against our foes. We cower in this place, waiting. Drogo would have ridden on the city by now." Daenerys's anger flared. She strode up to Kotho, mindful of the onlookers. Drogo was a great Khal, but he knew that half a world lay between him and the Iron Throne. He did not charge blindly. "I will not throw away your lives for a fool's rush. We are here to claim a kingdom, not to die vainly on its walls. If you cannot respect my commands, Kotho, you may ride away now or challenge me." A stillness fell. Kotho's dark eyes flicked to the Iraq at his hip. Then he exhaled, a slight slump in his shoulders. "My call," he muttered through clenched teeth. After that, the muttering quieted, but Daenerys saw resentment lingering in some faces. She reassured herself that once she led them to a victory, any victory, the Dothraki would roar her name as fiercely as they had once roared Drogo's. Around that same time, Shenna, the pirate captain who had ferried them across the sea, arrived in Dorne. She traveled overland from a cove where her ships lay anchored. Daenerys received her in a private corner of the valley. Shenna wore a practical coat of supple leather, a cutlass at her side, and a sardonic smile. "I have news," Shenna said without preamble. "Some of my sailors have been carousing in port towns up and down the coast. Word has leaked that strange horsemen have landed in Dorne. Perhaps not widespread knowledge yet, but rumors exist. If they spread, it will reach the Lannisters eventually." Daenerys's pulse quickened in alarm. "Then we must move soon. Does Prince Doran know?" Shenna shrugged. "Likely. One of his men in Planky Town let slip to my quartermaster that the prince has been stamping out rumors left and right, threatening anyone who speaks too loudly. But you can't muzzle every tongue. The realm teems with hungry ears." Daenerys pressed her lips together. "Then we may have less time than we hoped. We must see if the Martells are ready to commit." The next day, she rode with Yora to Sunspear. They went in the early hours, accompanied by Oberyn Martell, who had lingered in the valley overnight after hearing of Shenna's warning. He led them at a brisk pace, dust kicking up under their horses' hooves. When they arrived at the castle's main courtyard, the staff hurried them inside, away from prying eyes. Doran received them in a solar overlooking the sea. A gently curved window admitted golden sunlight and the hiss of ocean breezes. A few guards waited at a discreet distance, but none close enough to overhear. Oberyn stood behind Doran's seat, arms folded. Arianne was absent, presumably handling some other matter. Doran looked wearier than before, the lines on his face etched deeper. "I too have heard these rumors," he said quietly after Daenerys explained what Shienna had told her. "My men have seized several travelers who spoke of horsemen who came off ships. One claimed he actually saw dragons. We have him locked away for the moment, but he is not the first to whisper such tales." Daenerys stiffened. "So the secret is soon to be no secret at all. The Lannisters may hear. They could dispatch an army to Dorne." "That is our fear," Doran said, closing his eyes briefly. "And even though we have every right to refuse Lannister troops entry into our domain, the weight of the crown is not easily shrugged aside. If Tywin Lannister demands we produce these rumored invaders, we will have a diplomatic crisis on our hands. Worse, he may suspect we are harboring you and decide to make war on Dorne directly. Then we must strike first," Daenerys said, voice trembling slightly with the urgency of it. "Or at least make a show of power that unites your loyal lords behind me. If the realm sees that Dorne stands openly for the Targaryen restoration, some might flock to our cause. The Lannisters are not loved by many." Doran's eyes slid to Oberyn, who returned the look. Neither man spoke for a few moments. Then Doran let out a slow breath. "A bold step. Are we prepared for war, Daenerys? If we march under your banner, that is a declaration that cannot be undone. I must be certain you are ready to fight, truly fight, if an army comes down the Prince's Pass or across the bone-dry flats of the Dornish marches." Daenerys clenched her fists at her sides, feeling the weight of the moment. "My Khalasar will ride with me. My dragons, small as they are, will burn our enemies if they must. I have an alliance with Shienna's ships, though they are few. Ser Jorah believes we can hold Dorne's passes, at least for a time, if your armies join us. When the Lannisters shift their forces south, Stannis or Robb Stark might seize the opportunity to strike them from the north or the sea. That could break them." Oberyn's lip curled into a half-smile. "I like the idea of the Lannisters caught between hammer and anvil. Let them scramble." Doran still seemed troubled. "We do not know how the Tyrells would react, though. Mace Tyrell has joined his forces to the Lannisters through marriage. Would the Tyrells march upon Dorne as well? War with the Reach would be long and bloody." Daenerys remembered that House Martell and House Tyrell had ancient rivalries, with Dorne resisting conquest for centuries. "Perhaps I can reach out to Margaery Tyrell," she said. "She is set to wed King Joffrey, but that arrangement might sour if I can show the Tyrells a better path to power under my reign. Then again, that would be a dangerous game. They might simply betray us to the Lannisters." Oberyn snorted. "Mace Tyrell is no fool, but he's also not known for boldness if it lacks a sure chance of triumph. With the Lannisters ascendant, he may cling to them." Daenerys pressed on. "Then we fight if we must. The time for half measures is slipping away, Prince Doran. If you delay, the Lannisters may bring the war to you on their terms once these rumors fully take hold." Doran's gaze drifted to the wide window where the sea sparkled in the midday sun. "Then we must choose the ground upon which we will fight." He tapped his fingertips on the arm of his chair. "I will send ravens to every lord in Dorne, summoning them to Sunspear. We will reveal you to them, show them your dragons, speak of the old alliance. Those who are loyal to House Martell will stand with us. Those uncertain may flee, but I doubt they will risk standing against their prince in open rebellion. Not now." Daenerys bowed her head slightly in gratitude. "Thank you, my prince." He lifted a hand. "Do not thank me yet. This commits Dorne to open war. We must be prepared for the crown's response. We will need to fortify the Prince's Pass and the Boneway, the two main routes into Dorne from the Stormlands and the Reach. And we must solidify our defenses along the sea. The Lannisters and Tyrells have navies that could attempt a landing on our southern coast." Oberyn drummed his fingers on the table. "I will begin mustering our spears, father. If it comes to open battle in the passes, I will lead the vanguard." Doran paused, regarding Daenerys. "You, I hope, will be at the head of your horsemen. You told us you intended to lead from the front, as Drogo did. If you are to convince Dornish lords that you are worthy of their fealty, show them that you have no fear." Daenerys nodded without hesitation. "I will." They spent the next hours in intense discussion of logistics. Jorah assisted, referencing his knowledge of previous campaigns in Dorne. They talked of the Targaryen invasions centuries ago, how Mors Martell and Nymeria of the Rhoynar had proven adept at defending their deserts and passes. Now, ironically, a Targaryen would fight alongside the Martells in those same deserts. By the time evening fell, Daenerys's head swam with details of supply routes, garrison strengths, and the hazards of desert warfare. Doran insisted she remain in Sunspear that night. Oberyn departed to gather the local lords, leaving Daenerys in the castle's labyrinthine halls. She dined with Doran in a modest courtyard garden overshadowed by tall walls of pale stone. Though servants attended them, their conversation remained subdued, acknowledging that soon all pretense of peace would shatter. Late in the night, Daenerys stood on a balcony overlooking the city's rooftops. Beyond lay the sea, a black expanse flecked with silver moonlight. She thought of Khal Drogo, of how he had once promised to gift her the 7 kingdoms. Now she was on the cusp of making that promise reality. Yet the cost could be immense. She would be unleashing her Dothraki upon the realm. She would be calling down the wrath of the Iron Throne upon Dorne, a land that had suffered enough tragedies in recent memory. Did she have the right? Could she still choose a different path? Then she recalled the memory of walking into Drogo's funeral pyre, of how the flames had not consumed her. She had been reborn. Her dragons had hatched and her destiny had crystallized. She was not simply a widow or a girl sold into marriage. She was Daenerys Targaryen, mother of dragons, rightful queen of Westeros. Her birthright was the throne that Robert Baratheon and the Lannisters had defiled. She would not forsake that. The realm was bleeding, yes, but perhaps she could become the salve if only she triumphed. If she failed, she would be just another name in the litany of ambitious pretenders. Her children would die, her Khalasar would be scattered, and the Iron Throne would remain in the hands of the usurpers. She whispered a silent vow to the night air, "I will not fail." In the following days, the horns of summons echoed across Dorne. Lords from the Greenblood's banks, from the sandy coasts, from the stony mountains began to arrive in Sunspear. They came in trickles at first, small retinues of knights and bannermen, riding under banners of scorpions, suns, spears, and all manner of Dornish sigils. Each was welcomed quietly, away from the eyes of outsiders. A hush fell over Sunspear's corridors as the gathering swelled. Daenerys remained mostly sequestered with Prince Doran, Oberyn, and Arianne, who had taken on a key role in receiving the lords. On the appointed day, at midday, the Martells led these lords into a grand hall not unlike the one where Daenerys had first presented herself, though now every seat was filled and the air hummed with tension. At first, Daenerys was out of sight, waiting Ithora and a pair of her Dothraki blood riders in an antechamber. She could hear the lords muttering, questioning why they had been summoned in such haste. Then Doran raised his voice, amplified by the acoustics of the chamber. "My lords of Dorne, my friends and bannermen, you have long trusted House Martell to guide you. Today I ask for that trust again. We stand on a precipice. The realm is in chaos and the Lannisters sit the Iron Throne, the same house that butchered our kin. For years we have borne that injustice, searching for the right moment to strike. Now that moment has come." He paused, letting the lords murmur. Then he gestured. A herald struck the floor with his staff, and Daenerys took that as her cue. She emerged, head high, Drogon perched on her shoulder. Yora followed, while the 2 Dothraki led Rhaegal and Viserion, who were now large enough that both men struggled to control them. The dragons hissed and stomped, their wings partially spread in agitation at the crowd. The lords gasped. Some stood abruptly, hands going to sword hilts. Daenerys saw their eyes wide with astonishment, some with fear. A few with awe. Doran spoke. "Behold Daenerys Storeborn of House Targaryen, the mother of dragons, rightful queen of the Undulls, the Rhoynar, and the First Men. She has come to us to reclaim her birthright and to avenge the wrongs done to her house. She has asked for our help. And I, Doran Martell, swear that if we stand with her, she will bring justice upon the Lannisters." Daenerys lifted her hands, urging calm as Drogon snapped at the air. "My lords," she said, letting her voice resonate, "I know this must be a shock. You have heard rumors, whispered tales. Let me show you, the dragons are not dead. They live, as does the blood of House Targaryen. I stand before you to ask your aid in overthrowing those who have usurped the throne and brought sorrow to your prince's family. If you stand with me, I will restore a just rule, free of the Lannisters' cruelty. I will remember those who fight for me. And I will repay House Martell's suffering by delivering those responsible to a dragon's justice." From the throng of lords, a man in a sun-embroidered surcoat stepped forward. "How can we be sure you won't turn these beasts on us if we displease you?" Daenerys met his glare without flinching. "I do not seek to rule through terror against those who support me. Only my enemies need fear Dragonfire." A wave of hushed conversation rippled through the gathering. Then another lord, older, with a white streak in his dark hair, asked, "What is your plan, my queen? Will we march at once on King's Landing?" "No," Daenerys answered firmly. "Not yet. We will prepare. We will fortify Dorne against any incursion. Should Tywin Lannister send an army, we will break it in the passes. Then, when the time is right, we strike. Together." The older lord nodded slowly, weighing her words. "We remember well how your father ended," he said, voice grave. "We will not suffer another mad king. Will you promise us that your reign will be kinder to Dorne than Aerys's?" Daenerys felt the scrutiny of every eye upon her. She breathed deeply, recalling how even Viserys had confessed that their father was mad and cruel. "I am not my father," she said simply. "I have seen too much suffering to become what he was. I promise you, if you follow me, you will find no tyrant." A hush descended. Then Oberyn moved through the crowd, laying a hand on the shoulder of the older lord, who stiffened slightly. "I will vouch for her word," Oberyn said. "She has not come to enslave us. She has come to repay a blood debt. Think of Elia. Think of the children. The Lannisters must pay." That invocation seemed to kindle a spark in the crowd. One by one, the lords remembered the fate of Elia Martell and her children. They recalled the decades of simmering resentment under the rule of the Iron Throne. They weighed the risk of defiance against the lure of vengeance and the chance to crown a queen who might restore Dornish pride. A few wavered, uncertain, muttering about the Tyrell's strength, about how the war might devour Dorne. But Prince Doran stood from his seat, slowly, painfully, and declared his unwavering commitment to Daenerys. "House Martell pledges itself," he said, "and Dorne shall do the same." It is time the dragon and the Sun and Spear moved as one. That proved to be the turning point. One by one, lords bent the knee or vowed their support. Daenerys' chest swelled with a mixture of relief and determination. She sensed the forging of a new alliance, though fragile, sparked by rage at the Lannisters and a thirst for Targaryen restoration. The crowd's fervor grew, culminating in calls of Martell and fire and blood, echoing in the vaulted hall. Over the ensuing days, Daenerys rode out with Oberyn, Arianne, and Yora to various fortresses and holdfasts across Dorne. They inspected garrisons, mustered levies, and coordinated supply lines with her camp in the Hidden Valley. Her presence reassured the local lords that the Targaryen queen was not some distant rumor, but a living woman with scaled beasts at her side. She visited watering holes where her Dothraki had now been allowed to roam. The Martell banners flew side by side with her rudimentary Targaryen banners. Everywhere she went, she encountered a mixture of wonder, excitement, and lingering wariness. And then, in the dead of night some weeks later, a raven arrived from one of Doran's spies in King's Landing. The message was succinct, written in a hurried scrawl. "The hand knows. Ships from the royal fleet have been sighted south of Old Town heading toward the Broken Arm. Expect landings in Dorne. The crown demands the prince answer for rumors of Targaryen infiltration." Doran read the note in silence, then summoned Daenerys, Oberyn, and Arianne to his private solar. The quiet that filled the chamber was like the hush before thunder. Daenerys felt her heart hammering. "They come," she whispered. Oberyn's grin was equal parts anticipation and menace. "Good. Let them break upon our sands." Arianne looked to her father. "We must hurry to seal the passes. Recall every spear. Ready the city for a siege if need be." Doran's voice trembled slightly as he spoke, though he tried to hide it. "Yes. Our time of preparation is over. Daenerys, I pray you and your horsemen are ready. War has come to Dorne." Daenerys squared her shoulders. She recalled Kotho's restless demands for battle, the swirling eyes of her dragons, the vow she had made to avenge Elia, to reclaim her birthright. This was the moment. "We are ready," she said, though inside she felt a maelstrom of fear and exhilaration. That very night, she rode back to the Hidden Valley. She found the Khalasar in a state of tense readiness. The scouts had brought word of movement along the coasts. The Dothraki had always been most alive when war beckoned, and Daenerys sensed a strange relief in them. At last, they would ride. At last, the waiting was done. Under a canopy of stars, she gathered the blood riders and the key captains of her horde. Yora stood beside her, nodding in approval as she addressed them in halting Dothraki. "Blood of my blood," she began, "the time has come. The men of the stone houses come to fight us. But they do not know the speed of our horses, the skill of our blades, the fire of our dragons. We will show them. We will burn them if they stand against us." A rumble of approval swept through the riders. Kotho, for once, looked satisfied, as though this was what he had waited for all along. Daenerys lifted an arm. Drogon flapped onto it, letting out a savage screech. The Dothraki roared in answer, brandishing their araks. At dawn, columns of horsemen emerged from the valley, streaming across the dusty wastes of Dorne in a whirlwind of hoofs. At Daenerys' command, they did not ride alone. Dornish outriders accompanied them, guiding them through the labyrinth of canyons to the passes that the royal army would likely attempt to use. Meanwhile, Oberyn and Arianne mobilized foot soldiers and mounted spears, fortifying the roads and vantage points that overlooked the rocky approach from the Reach and the Stormlands. Ravens flew in all directions, bearing orders and requests for reinforcements. On the third day, Daenerys herself rode to the Prince's Pass with a portion of her Khalasar. The pass was a narrow defile through the Red Mountains of Dorne, flanked by towering cliffs. Dornish scouts at the far side reported that a Lannister-led force, perhaps a few thousand men, was marching south, supported by some knights from the Reach. The Crown was testing Dorne's loyalty with steel. She reached a vantage point that overlooked the pass's entrance, a high spur of rock from which one could see the dust kicked up by the approaching army. Dornish spears lined the ridge, their banners fluttering in the desert wind. Daenerys reined in her horse, scanning the distance. Her dragons circled overhead, shrieking at the rising thermals. They were not yet big enough to be war machines in the full sense, but they could still sow terror, and perhaps set ablaze a few supply wagons, if they could be coaxed to attack from above. Jorah halted beside her, his armor dusty from days of hard riding. "They'll be here by nightfall," he said, shading his eyes with one hand as he gazed into the distance. "We can harass them with horse archers in these hills, lure them deeper, then strike. Between the Dothraki and the Dornish foot, we can trap them." Daenerys nodded, adrenaline coursing through her veins. "See it done. I will lead the Dothraki in the charge when the time comes. Let the Dornish archers rain arrows from the ridge." So the plan was laid. As evening descended, the Lannister banners came into view. A golden lion on crimson, leading a force of several thousand. Among them fluttered the golden rose of Tyrell, indicating some collaboration from the Reach. The men advanced cautiously, presumably aware that Dorne was hostile territory. Yet they might not expect the sudden fury of a Dothraki Khalasar. Daenerys massed her riders in a sheltered basin behind a low rise, hidden from the main approach. Dornish scouts kept watch, whispering updates about the enemy's movements. The sun sank below the jagged peaks, painting the sky in orange and purple. Daenerys's heart thudded in time with the restless stamping of her horse. Drogon, perched on a nearby rock, growled softly at the gathering gloom. When the first outriders of the Crown's army entered the pass, Daenerys signaled. A Dornish horn sounded from the ridge, and a barrage of arrows fell upon the unsuspecting scouts. Shouts rang out, echoing against the cliffs. The Lannister column hesitated, uncertain whether to advance or withdraw. In that moment of confusion, Daenerys spurred her horse forward. The Dothraki thundered behind her, streaming over the rise in a blur of braided hair and curved blades. She felt the rush of wind in her face, the pounding of hooves beneath her. The Lannister lines tried to form a shield wall, but the Dothraki crashed into them before they could organize. Screams cut the air. Daenerys swung an arak, one gifted to her by a Dothraki smith, striking a panicked soldier across the shoulder. Blood spattered. Around her, her riders howled, slicing through the lightly armed vanguard. Dornish archers continued to unleash volleys from above. Dust rose in choking clouds, lit by the flickering torches and the last vestiges of twilight. Drogon took flight, winging overhead. He was not as large as a mature dragon of old, but his presence alone caused men to recoil. With a shrill cry, he descended on a knot of Lannister spearmen, exhaling a brief torrent of flame that set their cloaks and banners aflame. Their shrieks filled Daenerys' ears. She felt a pang of horror even as she steeled herself. This was war, and she had chosen it. Rhaegal and Viserion, handled by Jorah's contingent, flew in fitful spurts, spitting smaller bursts of flame that nonetheless sowed fear in the ranks. The Crown's men tried to rally, with one knight in gilded armor bellowing for them to hold formation. But the pass was narrow and the ground uneven. Horses stumbled, supply wagons got in the way, and the swirling Dothraki hammered at the flanks. Then Dornish spearmen emerged from hidden clefts in the rocks, pressing the assault. Within a span of an hour, the royal force began to break apart, men throwing down their weapons to flee or surrender. Some tried to retreat up the pass, only to find a Dornish barricade. Others made a desperate stand in a rocky hollow, fighting back to back until the Dothraki overwhelmed them. Daenerys found herself face to face with a wounded knight who clutched a bloodied sigil of House Tyrell. He looked up at her, eyes wide with terror. "Have mercy," he gasped. "My lady queen, mercy." She remembered the wanton brutality she had once seen the Dothraki unleash upon slaves and captives. She clenched her rack, torn between the savage logic of the Khalasar and the mercy she wished to embody. The man was no threat now, bleeding out on the stony ground. She lowered her blade. "Surrender and you will live," she said. He collapsed in relief. Dothraki riders converged on him, some shouting about taking trophies. Daenerys shouted them down. "He yields. Do not kill him." They hesitated but ultimately obeyed her, dragging the knight away to be bound. Across the pass, the dead and dying littered the ground, the dust now sticky with blood. The clang of steel upon steel faded to disorganized skirmishes and the moans of the injured. Dawn found Daenerys picking her way through the aftermath. Scavenger birds circled overhead, calling for carrion. The Dothraki roamed the battlefield, stripping valuables. Some of the Dornish spearmen assisted their wounded or gathered the bodies of their own fallen for proper rites. Yora approached, spattered with dust and gore, a fresh cut across his forearm. He bowed his head to Daenerys. "A victory, Khaleesi," he said, though his voice was somber. "They're calling it a rout. Many dead on the enemy's side, few on ours, at least comparatively. The survivors are your prisoners. This pass is firmly in Martell hands." Daenerys nodded, a hollow feeling in her stomach. "At what cost? How many of ours fell?" "Couple dozen Dothraki, a handful of Dornish. Many injured. We'll see how many survive the day." She swallowed hard. Better than it might have been. A war cry from behind made her turn. Kothos stood on a small boulder, brandishing a captured Lannister banner. His face was streaked with blood and an exultant grin stretched across his features. Around him, riders whooped in triumph. She realized how this moment would bind them to her more strongly than any promise. She had led them to a great slaughter and emerged victorious. This was the savage bond the Dothraki revered. She felt both shame and grim satisfaction. She dismounted, finding Drogon perched atop a smashed wagon. He spread his wings, letting out a reptilian hiss. The stench of burnt flesh clung to him. Daenerys gently stroked the scales of his neck, whispering a soft word in Valyrian. He snapped at the air, then settled, panting from exertion. "Yes," she thought, "you have tasted war now. We all have." Word of the victory rippled through Dorne, and soon, no effort could conceal that the Targaryen queen had indeed returned. The Martell banners flew beside the three-headed dragon as more and more lords threw in their lot. Agents carried the news to King's Landing, no doubt telling Tywin Lannister that a dragon queen had defeated his men in the Prince's Pass. Daenerys braced herself for the next blow in this cascading conflict. Perhaps Tywin would send a far larger force, or perhaps he would sue for a truce to glean more information. She did not know which to expect, but either way, she would be ready. Over the next days, Daenerys tended the wounded, listened to Yora's counsel, and saw to the care of her dragons, who had devoured their fill of charred flesh on the battlefield. Prince Oberyn arrived with fresh Dornish troops, praising her victory and urging her to press the advantage. "We should march north," he said. "Strike at the Stormlands or push toward the Reach. We can keep the Lannisters off balance." Doran, more cautious, advised consolidation. "We must hold Dorne first. Tywin may attempt to siege Sunspear from the sea if we stretch ourselves too thin." Torn between these two arguments, Daenerys weighed her options. She wanted to ride forth to press her momentum, but she knew Doran's warning was wise. War was not won in a single stroke. In the end, she opted for a middle course. She dispatched some of her Dothraki in fast-riding parties alongside Dornish cavalry to raid supply lines in the Reach, sowing confusion and forcing Mace Tyrell to keep his banners close to home. Meanwhile, she returned to Sunspear with the core of her Khalasar, fortifying the city under the watchful eyes of Doran and Arianne. She made a public declaration of her intent. Westeros belongs not to the Lannisters, but to the rightful queen. If the realm did not yet believe in her, she would make them believe. And so the war escalated. Ravens flew north, carrying tidings of Daenerys Targaryen's victory in Dorne. Some houses cursed her name, while others lifted quiet prayers that she might deliver them from the Lannisters' iron grip. The small folk whispered of dragons returned, uncertain whether to cheer or tremble. Daenerys spent her days in a storm of planning sessions, training, and forging new alliances. She granted clemency to those who surrendered, hoping to show that she was not her father's daughter in cruelty. A few captured knights swore fealty to her, claiming they had joined the crown's army only out of necessity. She took their oaths with caution, mindful of potential treachery. At night, when the halls of Sunspear grew quiet, she would linger on a balcony or a terrace, letting the warm Dornish breeze play over her face. Often, she was too tense to sleep. Thoughts of Drogo's pyre and her vow to take what was hers swirled in her mind. On such nights, she sometimes took comfort in her dragons, letting them nestle around her feet as she stroked their warm scales. They were her children, her living proof that the age of Targaryens was not ended. And in that hush of darkness, she would imagine the Iron Throne, cold, jagged metal hammered from the swords of 1,000 conquered foes. She pictured herself seated upon it, her dragons grown to monstrous size, a Dothraki host at her back, the banners of loyal lords filling the Red Keep's throne room. She imagined Tywin Lannister kneeling, Joffrey dethroned, the realm at last rid of the men who had defiled it. But the vision always led her back to the reality of blood and ashes, of steel meeting flesh, of a realm drowned in carnage unless she found a way to temper conquest with mercy. So she stood in the torchlit hush of Sunspear's highest battlements, gazing across the moonlit rooftops, a queen on the brink of reshaping history or being devoured by it. She inhaled the scent of salt and desert wind. Her war had truly begun. The dragons were awake. The horse lords had tasted Westerosi blood. The princes of Dorne had cast aside caution to stand at her side. No matter the final toll, there was no turning back. Only victory or death lay ahead. She closed her eyes, recalling Drogo's words from another life. "You are the moon of my life, I shall lead you past the ends of the earth." He had not led her here, he was gone, ashes scattered to the wind, but in a sense he had. For his love had forged her fire, had birthed the dragons, had sent her AC. Ross the sea with a Khalasar in tow. Now it fell to her to finish what had been set in motion. "I am Daenerys Stormborn," she whispered. "I will not fail." And her words were carried away into the Dornish night, into the uncertain future that loomed like the edge of a blade.